Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hybrid User Creation Process Training. My name is John Boyd, and I'm a Unified Communications Engineer here at Emergent Networks. We've been doing an awful lot, especially in Unified Communications and Professional Services team. We've been doing a lot of hybrid user or hybrid setups for our clients, where we'll get a request to migrate from an on-premise small business server, regular Exchange server, or even other hosted environment, and migrate them to Office 365. Now, one of the things that we like to do with these types of scenarios is to retain the management of users through Exchange and through Active Directory and local tools without having to, go out to Office 365 and what do I do out there versus what do you do inside. So what we like to do is we like to set up a hybrid server, an Exchange server. Now, a hybrid server is really no different than any other Exchange server, but it does make the user creation process a little tricky, and because there's a lot of different pieces and parts to it. So let's just kind of go through some of those right now. So first off, we have the local Active Directory. Okay, local Active Directory is just your regular Active Directory. And then you've got Azure Active Directory, and that's the cloud-based version, the Microsoft Office 365 version of Active Directory. You have a hybrid Exchange server, which I just talked about, and then AAD Connect. AAD Connect is the Azure Active Directory Connect. That is the system that sits between the local Active Directory and Azure Active Directory and makes the synchronization between the local and cloud-based environments. Optionally, we will sometimes include Active Directory Federated Services. And what that does is that just really provides a authentication between Office 365, forcing it back to the local directory. It's not something we'll touch on it, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on it as this is not really affected. So let's dive into the systems here. We have the Azure Active Directory and local Active Directory. Now you should be familiar with the local Active Directory pretty well by now. And I'm just going to go through some of the similarities and differences and things that you need to be aware of when creating local accounts that are going to be synchronized and used in Office 365. So you have the user principal name. So the user principal name is essentially the user's identity in the local directory. And it's a combination of the username and the local Active Directory fully qualified domain name, which is the FQDN. So in hybrid deployments, we need to make sure, above all, if absolutely nothing else gets taken away from this training, is the user principal name needs to be the same as their external domain. For instance, in Emergent Networks, we need to make sure that the users are set up with emergentnetworks.com. Typically, this will be the same as their email address. We prefer it that way. It reduces confusion for all sorts of things. So we prefer to keep it that, but it must be externally accessible, and it also needs to be added to their Office 365 domain, which I can show you a little bit later. SAM account name, this is just the regular username, but in Office 365 and Exchange, it uses that as their alias. So we also want to make sure that that's going to be the same as the user part of the user principal name. Okay, the mail attributes, just the email address that everyone gets. And the proxy addresses is where their additional email addresses are. For instance, you could have, in my case, or in Jamie's case, you'd have Jamie A. He could also have one that says Big Boss Man at emergentnetworks.com. Now, emails sent to either one of those is still going to be delivered to his mailbox, but his primary is going to be the one he replies from. So that's going to always be Jamie A, unless, of course, he really wanted Big Boss Man. We could probably set that up for him. I have a feeling Gary wouldn't be too happy about that, though. Now we have immutable ID. Now the immutable ID is something that's unique to a hybrid environment. What happens is when a user is created in the local Active Directory, Office 365 is completely unaware of it. And likewise, if a user account was already created in Azure Active Directory as a cloud-only account, it's unaware of the local Active Directory object, whether it was even created yet or not. So until they're synchronized and matched up, they go through a process of soft matching where the user principal names for both local and Azure Active Directories will be used to soft match that user. Now, once they match, and it's pretty sure that those two are the same individual, what then happens is a immutable ID is then generated. That immutable ID is written to both objects. It's a very long, it looks like a GUID that then binds those two together. So at any time, once they've been matched and that immutable ID has been generated, you can change any object in any location, then that synchronization will continue to occur. So you don't have to worry about if you change the UPN at some point in time, it's going to break the cloud, of course, except for if you change it to a .local versus the .com. All right, hybrid exchange server. Now, again, this is essentially the same as any other exchange server, but with the licensing is provided by Microsoft for free, which is pretty compelling to a lot of environments because they like to, they don't have to spend money on an exchange server if their mail is going to be handled out in Office 365. Office 365 and Microsoft also want to provide companies as much manageability as they can locally to be able to kind of manage the day-to-day stuff without having to change their processes too much. So this license is provided for free. It also gives you the added benefit of having local devices such as multifunction printers, scanners, and all that stuff to have an SMTP relay to be able to send messages outside of their organization. Without a hybrid server, we'd have to configure each device to connect and authenticate to Office 365 directly, and which means we have to set up firewall rules to allow port 25 traffic, etc. It just makes this process way easier. Now, what a hybrid server is not, okay? It's not allowed to contain any mailboxes indefinitely, okay? And really is just it can. I mean, it's just a regular exchange server, but that the intent of this server is to have mailboxes stored in Office 365. Now, the exception to this, and it's not an official exception, but it passes my grandma rule. My grandma rule is if I don't feel convicted about telling my grandma about something, I go ahead and do it. So this passes my grandma rule. So if Microsoft came to me today and says, "Hey, why do you have this service mailbox on here?" I'd be like, "Well, no one really logs into it. It's really just meant for, scanning authentication and bounce messages. So we really don't care," and they probably won't care either. But just to kind of to harp on this just a little bit longer, mailboxes should not be here. When a user is offboarded or departs the company, migrating them back to the hybrid server for long-term storage is probably not the right answer. All right, AAD Connect. Now this is kind of the heart of the hybrid environment when it comes to object synchronization. So there's 3 phases to the AAD Connect, and what it does is it goes through the import phase first. So what it does, it reaches out to both Active Directory, the local Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory, and then pulls in all of the basically the entire database, and it takes those and then goes to its synchronization phase where it will go through and identify the differences between the two and take timestamps into account to make sure only the latest information is updated, and then it's going to then generate its list of things that need to change in both sides. Then it goes to the export phase, and now the export phase is where it then sends those changes out to the respective directories and then commits those changes. Okay, so it just compares values and sends them out. It's pretty simple, but it is something that definitely can get missed. So we want to make sure that we know how it works. So this kind of is a graphic for those of you that are not super wordy and like pictures. So what we have here is we have our little timer up in the top here. And what that timer is just, it means it's 30 minutes. So every 30 minutes, this thing is going to fire off by default. Okay, and then you've got your local Active Directory over here, right? And you've got your Azure Active Directory over here. And this is your AAD Connect server, and this is the thing that's actually going to be going through and doing that comparison like we discussed. So let's walk through how this works. So in the first step, the 30 minutes go off and it goes through its import phase. Okay, so changes are, the databases are downloaded to the AAD Connect server, right? And then what it does is it goes to the synchronization phase, where it takes that and shakes all that data up and compacts it and squeezes it and tries to find what the differences are, and to prepare for the next phase, which is then of course the export phase, where it takes those changes and only those changes and then writes those back to their respective directories. All right, Active Directory Federation services. I will briefly discuss this one, but again, it's not super, it's not required at all, but it is a helpful topic because you may run into some of these issues out there. What it does, it provides same sign-on, and notice I said same sign-on, not single sign-on, because single sign-on is a different type of connectivity. This one is just using your already existing Office 365 and local Active Directory credentials and passing those through. So it's just same sign-on. It also allows for pre-authentication for Outlook and Exchange Online. So if you are inside the domain, if you're sitting on your computer on your Emergent laptops or Emergent Networks laptop and you're sitting on the domain, it'll pre-authenticate you, knowing that you already have logged into your computers, and it's okay, well, this guy's probably a legitimate user. We'll go ahead and let him through. Okay, and it does take away the authentication requirement of Office 365, and so there is really no need to replicate passwords through AAD Connect to Office 365, though it's highly recommended, just because if for whatever reason, since ADFS exists on premise, if there is an outage, your users are not going to be able to get to their email. Email flow is still going to go into Office 365, but they're not going to be able to access it because the authentication is going through a server that's no longer accessible. So then you have to go through a long process of disabling the ADFS system in order for them to then authenticate to Office 365, and then once the system comes back online, then you have to refederate, which can cause some issues with the users. So it's just something to be aware of, that if users call in and say that they cannot access their email, but obviously Office 365 doesn't go completely offline, well, let's hope, and so the mails are still flowing, they're just not able to access them. Okay, now that we understand how all of these things, all these little pieces and parts that we've talked about, we now understand what they do. Now let's talk about how that applies when creating a user account, right? So again, we have ourselves our handy little local Active Directory over here, and we've got our Azure Active Directory here. And then we're going to go through the process of describing how the users should be created and how that then gets replicated out to Office 365. So we've got our little user out there. The UPN needs to be set to the external domain. Their group memberships are set, all that stuff, and then a remote mailbox is created, and I'll discuss that in a little bit here. Then Active Directory syncs to Office 365. We're going to want to go out there and we're going to want to verify the Office 365 UPN is set correctly, and I can show you a very easy way to find out if that was done right or not. And then we need to apply an appropriate license, because now what we've done is we've created basically a mailbox pointer in Exchange that says their user account, their mailbox exists out in Office 365, but to actually activate their mailbox in Office 365, we need to apply an appropriate license. And the reason why I say appropriate is because not all Office 365 licenses contain Exchange Online. So when we go through this, and I do I'll go through a demonstration, and I'll show you that there are certain licenses that do contain Exchange Online, and there are others that don't. And if you apply a license that does not, your user's going to be like, hey, why does my email not work? Well, it's because the license that was applied didn't contain Exchange Online, and therefore did not create a mailbox for that user. Now here's some gotchas. Everything in IT has a gotcha. So the gotchas for this there's a few, but they're fairly common. So ensuring that the UPN, and I've mentioned this a few times, so it should be, you should understand it's important. Ensure that the UPN in Active Directory is set to their external domain. Okay, that's a big one. It happens all the time. Then you have to create a remote mailbox on the hybrid server, and this is in using PowerShell. So to create a remote mailbox for an existing user, you have to use PowerShell. The commands are pretty simple, but nonetheless, you still need to, it's something that you're going to have to get in there and start digging into PowerShell, and that may be uncomfortable for some of you. Okay, and now we're going to wait our 30 minutes, or we can go in and force a directory synchronization from the AAD Connect server. Again, I'll demonstrate that. And then we're going to go out and verify Office 365's UPN did pick up as the external domain. And there's no errors there, or else your user's going to have some authentication issues. Okay, and then we're going to assign an Exchange Online license. So there's a few common issues, okay, that happen, and here's some of the resolution on how to fix some of these things. These are pretty simple. Most of them can be handled very, very quickly on your own. So this is pretty handy. I don't know if you want to take a screenshot and save it, and you can, maybe put it up on your cube wall there, tape it up, and say, hey, this is something John Boyd gave me because he's super cool. So one of the issues here is a user's UPN in Office 365 ends in @tenant, like for us it's emergentnetworks.onmicrosoft.com. So the key here is the .onmicrosoft.com. We're going to want to look at that, and that's going to be an indicator that the user's local AD UPN is set to something that's not in the domains list of Office 365. Okay, I'm using Emergent Networks as an example, but this would be true in any hybrid environment. Okay, so for Microsoft.com, if it was set to Microsoft.local, their UPN is going to be Microsoft.onmicrosoft.com, which is kind of redundant, but I kind of like it. So the resolution to that is to change the local UPN to something that is in Office 365. It's probably going to be in their domains list when you do the user creation in the UPN. You hit the drop down, it's probably going to be in there. So you're going to want to make sure that that's changed. Once that's done, all you have to do is synchronize it. It'll change itself in Office 365 and you're good to go. Okay, now the issue is a local mailbox was created and is being used instead of a remote mailbox. Now this is typical when setting up hybrid environments for customers that have their own IT and they're used to having a local Exchange server. So what they do is they just have their process, they always have created it this way, and sometimes they just get into that flow, that rhythm, and then, oh, I created a local mailbox, and this person's logged on, because they can log in to Outlook and on their phones and all that stuff. That's kind of the beauty of hybrid, is you can do one or the other, and they're using their mailbox, they're sending and receiving emails like a crazy person, and we can't just delete the account and recreate it in Office 365. Okay, so the issue is they were just given a local mailbox on the hybrid server. Again, you're not supposed to create them, but you can. So the only resolution to that is we then go through the regular migration process, which I'm not going to cover in here, but you will have to go in and migrate that and do an actual migration from the local Exchange server, the hybrid server, to Office 365. That will also preserve their emails. They'll still have all the stuff that they sent, so we don't have to worry about that. But it is a common mistake, especially in those scenarios. Another issue is the user's not showing up in Office 365 even after we force the directory synchronization. Now, when we force a directory synchronization, or when one occurs at the 30-minute mark, any object in the synchronized OUs list will be synchronized. Now, when we do implementations for hybrid systems, we don't prefer to synchronize the entire local Active Directory. That's a lot of objects to synchronize. It's a lot of things going out there, and some organizations can have thousands upon thousands. And there are limits to the deployments of AAD Connect and how many objects it can synchronize based on its database, if it's using local Exchange or its local Windows database, or if it's using SQL. So typically we use the internal domain or internal database, but in these types of situations, we do tend to limit the domain synchronization to just the ones that need to be in Office 365. So in this case, they're probably in an OU, probably in the user's OU, in the root of the domain, that is almost never synchronized to Office 365. So we're going to want to move that user to a synchronized OU. So putting them in an OU where all the other users are will then get them to synchronize to Office 365 on the next synchronization cycle. So then their object will get created in Office 365. We can assign them a license, verify their UPN, and they'll be off to the races. Okay, now another issue that I don't see a lot of, but every once in a while you do, is the user's account in Office 365 says cloud only. It won't show as directory synchronized. And that's because the user's account was created specifically in Office 365. And again, this tends to happen in organizations that have their own IT departments and they're maybe overthinking the process of creating hybrid user accounts. So what they did is they created an Office 365, assigned a license to it. It's receiving and sending emails fine, but they're probably going to have some weird authentication issues. So we are going to want to directory synchronize them because their passwords are not going to be the same. So really, the only answer to this is to create, or if one is already created but in an unsynchronized OU, is to move them into a synchronized OU, or create that user account in Active Directory, and then create their remote mailbox and ensure that UPN is set properly. Once it happens, then the next synchronization cycle, it's going to do a soft match, and it's going to say, oh, these two UPNs match. They're probably the same user. I'm going to then match these two, make it directory synchronized, and it's going to generate that immutable ID. Okay, so in short, that's how the process would work. But if you have any doubts at all about that one in particular, make sure that you escalate that so that we don't run into any data loss issues, especially if they have a local mailbox as well and a cloud mailbox. That could really cause some big problems. So if you're unsure, or if there's a little bit of confusion around that, go ahead and escalate that, and we'll take care of that for you. Okay, so here's a little summary of some of the things that we've talked about. We've got the involved services, which is local and Azure Active Directories. We have the AAD Connect server, and that's the one that does all that synchronization for us, all the heavy lifting. You've got the Hybrid Exchange server, which is basically just allows for Outlook Anywhere to connect quickly and to allow us to manage the additional addresses for the users. And then we've got ADFS, which is an optional authentication method for same sign-on. And then you've got the user objects. We've got that UPN, the super, super important UPN, the SAM account name for aliases, the mail attribute, and proxy addresses. Now in the AD Connect process, we have our import, synchronization, and export phases. And the Exchange remote mailbox is not a local account, and it's manageable from on-prem without having to go into Office 365, but it is synchronized with Office 365. So let's go ahead and let's do some demonstration. I'm going to show you kind of what right looks like, what wrong looks like, and other options and other ways that you can create them, and troubleshoot issues that you may run into in hybrid scenarios. All right, let's get into how to create. We're going to do 3 different things here. We're going to create a user the right way. I'm going to show you how to correct a user that was created incorrectly, and then some other ways that you can create user accounts in a hybrid configuration. So first off, we're going to start off here in Active Directory, and we're going to create a user like what most companies are going to copy an existing user. So a lot of times the user account is going to be created first without any Exchange attributes, and then we're going to want to create Mail and Office 365 for them. So let's do this. We're going to go ahead and go to new user. We're going to call this guy John Goober. We're going to have the whole Goober family working for us. So John G. Now let's go J. Goober. Okay. Now this is the UPN part I was telling you about that you want to make extra careful sure that you have the external domain. So we're going to set to emergentnetworks.com. And then this down here is their SAM account name, which is going to become their alias. And then we're going to set up a super secret password. Okay. I hope that's the same one. Here for this, we're just going to uncheck that and finish. Okay. So now we've created this this guy, and if we go in, we'll see under his account, we've got emergentnetworks.com. So that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to see. Now what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create his remote mailbox. Okay, now this is again something where we're going to have to go into Exchange Management Shell, and we're going to have to create the mailbox that way. So go to Exchange. Come on. helps to type it correctly. Exchange management shell. There we go. Okay, so it's going to connect up to our hybrid server. And what we're going to do is we're going to issue just a couple commands that we're going to then tell it to create a remote mailbox. So we're going to do this, enable dash remote mailbox. And now we're going to type in the SAM account name of that user. So jgoober. And now we're going to give them an email address, primary SMTP address, jgoober at EMERGENT networks.com. That's way harder to do to type and say at the same time than it should be. And now we're going to add another thing that is unique to this, and that's a remote routing address. So the remote routing address just tells the Exchange server that this is an Office 365 mailbox, and this is dependent on their tenant. So this will be emergentnetworks.mail.onmicrosoft.com. And once that's done, we hit enter. And he now has a remote mailbox. We're going to do one more thing. Set remote mailbox jgoober email address policy enabled to true. We're going to want to make sure that we have the email address policies enabled for this mailbox. So now when we go through and get remote mailbox for jgoober, we can see he's got an account. Okay. And now when we go into our Exchange admin center here, we'll look for John Goober, and you'll notice here this set is showing up here in Office as an Office 365 mailbox. It's a remote mailbox, but it's showing up here as Office 365. Okay, so we can go in here and we can see that he's got an email address here, and then he's got these aliases here of emergentnetworks.mail.onmicrosoft.com. Okay, that's going to be his remote routing address, and we can see that when we go down here that this is his remote routing address, knowing that that's where it's going to send mail to this user from the hybrid server. Okay, that's very important to have. So we're going to hit save here. Now, this person is not going to exist in Office 365 yet because we haven't done a directory synchronization. So if we go over here to our Office 365 tenant and we select John, there is no John Goober. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go and synchronize him. So we're going to go to our AED Connect server. This is the Synchronization Service Manager, and this is where we're going to see all of the objects that are going to pass to Office 365 in real time. So to then be able in PowerShell to force a directory synchronization, if you don't want to wait 30 minutes, you're going to open up PowerShell and type in import-module AD-sync, and that's going to then import the AD-sync module for you to be able to send commands. And we're going to do the start AD-sync sync cycle, also redundant, with a policy type of Delta. There are two different types. There's initial and there's Delta. For the most part, you're almost always going to use Delta. It's just going to change. It's just going to go through and take the differences. It's a little bit faster than initial synchronization. So now we've sent that command. Now we're going to see it did its Delta import. Now it's going through the synchronization process to figure out what the differences are. And then it's going to go here quickly into the export phase. Now you'll notice when we select the export phase, it's going to see an add. So we'll go in here, there's some strange GUID, but we open it up and it looks like jgoober is now being added to Office 365. So if we go back over here, and now we've got jgoober at emergentnetworks.com. And you'll notice that he has an emergentnetworks.com versus this sgoober person who does not. They have an emergentnetworks.onmicrosoft.com. We're probably going to want to check that out because they're going to have a hard time logging in. So we're going to go ahead and check them out later. Now, the final step to this, now that we've verified their UPN, is we're going to want to license this person. So in order for them to be able to get Exchange mailboxes and send emails and all that stuff, we're going to need to give them a license. So we go in here, select location, United States, and what I meant by previously when I said not all licenses contain Exchange, if you go to, for us, we're going to give him, let's give him a I'm gonna find it. Let's give him an E5. So in an E5 license, if we give him this, it turns on all these little features, and in here is Exchange Online Plan 2. You can have Plan 1, Plan 2. It really doesn't much matter. It just gives you different features within the Exchange Online plan, but you want to make sure it's Exchange Online plan. If we were to, for instance, go to Project, Project only has this online desktop client. It does not contain Exchange. So if we had selected this for them, they're not going to get a mailbox provision for them. So you want to make sure that it has Exchange Online. Any of the E licenses, E1 through E5, are going to contain Exchange Online. I'll go down here, hit save, and now we've assigned that E5 license. We can go ahead and hit close. And now if we refresh this, he shows as having an Office 365 license, and he's synced with Active Directory. Okay, so that's good. This person now is fully 100% set up. Everything's good. They've got a license, they've got a mailbox, and they'll show up in our Exchange Online instance. Okay, so then we'll go over here to Exchange, the Exchange Online tab, and here you'll see John Goober has a mailbox. So now he's set up completely, everything's good. Okay, now let's go through a different way that we can create a mailbox. So we've created the mailbox first by creating the user account and then creating the remote mailbox for them. Now, that isn't always needed. That was really going to be needed if we're going to be copying an existing user. But let's say you just want to create a mailbox directly as an Office 365 mailbox and skip all the scary PowerShell stuff. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to create an Office 365 account. Okay, we're going to name this Megan Goober. I'm pretty sure that's his sister, so we're going to do that. We're going to go over here and in users and demo users. This is a director synchronized OU, so we're going to put them there. M Goober and emergentnetworks.com. Also, this logon name, this is the UPN, so we want to make sure that that's correct. The user type is going to be a mailbox, and then we're going to also give them a super secret password. And here you can select whether you want them to change the password or not. I'm not going to select that, and we'll just hit OK. So now we've created Megan Goober's account. Okay, did all the same things we did before, but one thing that we didn't do was have to run the scary PowerShell commands. But the nice thing is it already does all of this stuff for you. So those steps get skipped. You don't have to do any of the enabling of the address policies because it comes on automatically. And their remote routing address is set properly. Okay. Now if we go back over to Active Directory and we hit refresh, Megan Goober is going to show up in there as well. Okay. Now, if we go to AD Connect, because now we've just created their mailbox, now we need to go and run another synchronization to get that user to show up over there. So it's going to do its import, delta sync, and export, and we'll see that user show up. All right, that looks like that's done. We'll go in here and we'll see that we have an add. Open up this guy again, and it looks like M Goober was then created and sent to Office 365. So let's go out to Office 365 and verify their UPN. So go here, hit refresh, and M Goober is showing up with emergentnetworks.com, also unlicensed. So if we go over here to Exchange and we hit refresh, it's the Exchange Online. They're not going to show up yet until we actually sign them a license. So let's go back here. We're going to add them also with an E5. And then we'll see what happens on the Exchange side. Okay, license applied, and over here we can see Megan Goober is now in Office 365 with a mailbox. So this person also 100% set up. So I would say this is probably the easy way. If you don't have to create, if you don't have to go through and add them to 50 different groups, this is probably the easiest way to create a mailbox with a hybrid environment. Now we noticed when we first started this thing that there was an incorrect user or a user that was already created, Smiley. Okay, so Smiley we noticed when we were in Office 365's portal that they were showing up with an on Microsoft Microsoft.com account. And if we go here, oh, that's why, because they were set up with emergentnetworks.local. Okay, we could have created a remote mailbox for them, licensed them, and everything was fine, but it's still going to show up in Office 365 as on Microsoft.com. There's a very easy way to fix this. You just click on emergentnetworks.com, hit apply, and OK. The next directory synchronization will then send that person out to Office 365. All right, so we're back over at AAD Connect. I've done a synchronization here, and you'll notice that when I open up that synchronization for them, for Smiley, you'll see a modify in there, so it went from sgoober at emergentnetworks.local to sgoober at emergentnetworks.com. Okay, so then now we can go over to our Office 365, hit refresh, and it changes that there too. The only thing we need left to do is to assign a product license to them to have them fully set up. So that's really all you need to do when it comes to fixing a user that was not showing up properly. If you'd made a mistake early on, it already synchronized that. You can always change that. That's not a huge deal. So what we've done is we've gone through how to create a user using the remote PowerShell commands, or the remote mailbox PowerShell commands. We've also went through creating a user account in the Exchange Admin Center for the hybrid server. And then we've also gone through a little bit of troubleshooting in the event that something got screwed up, especially with the UPN, and then went through some of the licensing options for them. So I hope this was a good lesson for you guys and gals. I'd like to thank you for watching.